As you're saying, closely tied to the issue of the border is not just security, economy, there's also food security and so much more. And this morning, we're taking a look at that border closure. The next few days, few weeks, what should we be doing, really? What should change, or should we maintain the status quo? And to discuss that this morning, we have joining us Ahmed Mansour, who's the President, Manufacturers Association of Nigeria. He joins us from our Abuja studio. And here in our Lagos studio, we have Africanfarmer Mogaji, who's the founder, Agribusiness NG. Good morning, gentlemen, and thank you for joining us on the program. Well, let me begin in Abuja. I know, Mr. Mansour, your association is asking for a review. Oh, pardon me, joins us via Zoom from Lagos. Your association is asking for a review of the border closure. Now, to a lot of people, that might mean different things. But what is that review you're asking for? What does it mean exactly?
Yes, I think essentially we are suggesting that the border should be reopened. Of course, if there is need to put in place further arrangements to ensure that the purposes for which the border was closed in the first instance are not defeated, that is why we called it a review. But essentially what we're asking for is that the closure of the border, we believe, had gone far enough. And at the end, there are good reasons why the border should not remain closed.
Didn't just come to this decision, this conclusion. Please go ahead.
Sorry?
Please go ahead. You
Yes.
can land on that.
No, when the border, yes, when the border was closed in the first instance, there are good reasons for it. First of all, at that time, as we all know, illegitimate imports, particularly foodstuffs, we are aware, for instance, of the massive importation of rice and a lot of substandard products that have made it extremely difficult for our rice farmers, for instance, to make good and make very difficult for many of our manufacturing companies to also operate competitively, because these products are dumped into this our market from all sorts of places. So the issue is you need to do something, and therefore when the government decided, after other attempts have failed to close the borders, we understood and we agree that this may be a price to pay for the resolution of the most serious problem. But I think after 1 year, we are of the view that to actually ensure that these malpractices, particularly trade malpractices, are arrested. The relationship between us and our neighboring countries, which to a large extent has indeed contributed to the problem, should have been resolved. And therefore, we believe the normal thing would be to reopen the borders and allow normal trading to take place. At any rate, we are aware also that Nigeria has signed the ECOWAS Treaty, which indeed requires that our borders should be open under normal international.
Okay.
We're also aware that Nigeria has signed the...
Well, Mr. Mansour, just a moment. We'll try to sort out that connection just so we can hear you better. But we need to also go to break. And when we return, we'll take on some of the issues you have touched on. And then, of course, take on Mr. Mogaji right here in our studios. Please stay with us. You're welcome back. So that was in 2019, October. We're in 2020, December. So let me come to the studio, Mr. Mogaji. So at that time, farmers, poultry farmers were doing well. And I mean, you'll expect that they're doing even much better now. So let me just ask you, just how well are farmers doing now?
They're not doing so well. A couple of things this year, we've had the pandemic, the lockdown, we've had the protest, we've had climate change of no rain and too much rain. So this year has not been favorable for farmers across the board.
So
hand.
Yes.
On the other hand, are the other issues of insecurity and the rest of that.
Yes.
How have, well, needless to say, food prices have increased.
Yes.
Food security is in jeopardy. What do we need to do to mitigate?
Well, this is a tough one, but we may need to be flexible with our borders. Why? Because we don't have storage. And if we don't have storage and we've had challenges with production, then we may have to be flexible to be able to accommodate what we don't have. So we need to be flexible with our borders, and we need to focus on more of productivity as against production. We should convert a lot of waste. What is already wasting, we should work at converting it.
Interesting. So the Manufacturers Association is asking for the borders to open up.
Yes.
What are you asking for? Flexibility is neither closed or open. So what exactly is it? Is it to open the borders or to keep them closed?
To open it with some clauses. Now, you know that there was restriction on importation of maize. Thereabout some 45 days later, we allowed it coming. It was primarily because they acted on not accurate information. And so that has affected the sector across board. The poultry farmers, many of them have shut down. You know, they're not smiling. Many of them have shut down, small, medium, large. And so the borders, we need to be able to bring in some things to cushion some of these effects now. The price of dollar, everything in the agri value chain, we are importing. We are importing. So if everything is dollar dependent and the price of dollar is going up, which means the input is not readily available. So we need to be flexible with the borders to say, hey, bring this in. You know, you can't bring this in. This is the quality of what you should bring in. You should bring in maize for livestock, not maize for human consumption. You know, you could just work around some things, but we need to be flexible for 2021 to be a good year for many people.
You know, there is also that challenge that a number of people think, you know, we as a nation should be giving thoughts to. Now, the opportunities that were inherent in a border closure, how well, because the belief is that in some quarters is that when we close the borders, it should encourage local production. It should encourage the local industries to take advantage of things that were hitherto imported, which price would have risen if any of them, you know, were still in the country. Would you say that we were prepared enough to have taken a due advantage of the opportunities of that border closure? How well do you think we did in that regard?
I don't think we leveraged the opportunity enough.
Why?
The border closure in itself, when it was announced, it was at the period where farmers could no longer go and produce corn to take advantage to produce for the livestock. So the time in the year, I think it was around September 18, thereabout, I was affected. Farmers could no longer plant. Don't forget, the major planting areas are in the north, and their rains mostly stop in October. So we could not take advantage, but we've had a year now. I think what is missing is we did not have a value chain approach. So we funded maize, we funded rice, but we did not fund logistics. We didn't fund input. We didn't fund distribution. All those other things that will ensure that the primary production will do well, we didn't pay attention to that. But I would say this, local production increased significantly. However, also, our population is increasing. You know, we've had more people sit at home this year, so meaning more consumption. You know, so, but we've not put in that value chain approach. That is missing. And that's why we're having a lot of challenges on the sector now.
Mr. Masuru, you know, one would also consider that to a large extent, while your organization is making that request that the federal government should reconsider the position of Nigeria on the border closure, in your opinion, do you think the issues that necessitated the border closure in the first place, do you think they have been addressed? Because part of the consideration, I believe, at the time was to mitigate imports that were undermining the activities of members of your association.
Yes, this is true. And this is why we said after 1 year, those issues that have created the problem should have been addressed. For instance, the key issue really is whether Nigeria and its neighboring countries, Benin Republic, Togo, Niger, and so on, whether we want to comply with the protocols that we have signed. There is the ECOWAS Trade Liberalization Protocol, which clearly states what can be moved across borders between the countries in a way that has minimum negative impact on various economies. Unfortunately, our neighbors were not complying with those protocols. And so part of the reason for the border closure is to make sure that we now take a stand and perhaps persuade or compel, if necessary, our neighbors to comply with these protocols. Now, I think that enough time has passed to do that. We're aware that the border closure is a two-way thing. It affects us, but it also affects our neighbors. And I believe that since the border closure in August last year, our neighbors have recognized the futility of what they're doing, patient engagement and agreements to be able to do so. But secondly, I think apart from import, export, and indeed, many of our members in the Manufacturers Association have indeed been exporting to our neighbors, to the West African region, and indeed have captured significant market share, which if the border closure continues, they will lose this market share. Now, as I was saying just before the interruption earlier on, we have also signed the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, and that agreement is going to kick off in January next year. That agreement expands on the trade liberalization that we had neighbors in ECOWAS to cover the entire continent. And then it means, therefore, that if we are to comply with the protocols that we are now signing, we must open the borders as well by that period. And so there is definite urgency to reopen the borders and to reestablish the normal protocols and the normal to make trade continues to take place, because it is in all our interests. It's in the interest of our economy. It is the interest of the continent as a whole to expand the trading opportunities between our various countries. And that is what we are putting for.
Now, you said that some of the issues responsible for the border closure or reduced for the border closure by now ought to have been addressed after 1 year. From where you stand and from the experiences of members of your association that hopefully you have gotten, do you think those issues have been resolved?
Well, we are aware because we've been in constant dialogue with the relevant agencies, with the Nigerian Customs Services, with the Office of the National Security Advisor, and so on, and with the Ministry of Trade, Industry, and Investment, as well as the Ministry of Finance. We are aware there has been a lot of engagements with our various countries. We are aware that also many of these agencies have been looking inwards to see what they themselves can do to improve their operations. For instance, we are aware that the Customs Services is now introducing more improved computerized systems, particularly for import controls and so on. And so I believe that these things are being constantly done. It's a dynamic situation. We expect that this effort will have to continue. Also, I think the capacity of our regulatory agencies, particularly Customs Services, the immigration services, and of course, the other agencies that are involved in control of the importation from shift of goods, such as NAFTA and the Standards Organization of Nigeria. All these agencies are now really rising to the occasion. And I believe that with this continuous improvement and continuous effort to if you like, in Nigeria and across the continent, I believe that the issues that necessitated the border closure in the first instance have significantly been ameliorated. And I believe under such circumstances, it is really counterproductive to continue to keep the borders closed.
So to put this in proper context, or maybe to add bites to your suggestion to the government, just how much have manufacturers lost as a result of this border closure? You said that, I mean, the goods are not entirely being exported well across the West African sub-region, but if you could put a cost to it, a figure to it, just how much have you lost, your members lost during this period?
Indeed, we are still trying actually to gather the statistics from our various members. But, we have a large number of manufacturers, especially in the food and beverages sector, that have been exporting quite significantly. We also have small and medium-scale entrepreneurs who are exporting across the border, especially, for instance, in the plastics, domestic plastic products market that are exporting as far as Sudan and even Central African Republic. So we've been gathering data to see how much have they lost. Now, the loss is in two respects. First of all, the loss of export opportunities, which is for those that are exported. But also, we have also imported quite a lot of things across the border, especially in terms of raw materials for our manufacturing industries. And of course, when you close the border, it means that our manufacturers have to now import by sea on the kind of material may not be necessary. But by sea, it costs about 8 times and takes about 4 times as long to import your materials by sea as you do across the border. Part of the reason, of course, is the situation with our ports. It's extremely expensive. It takes a long time to clear things through our ports and so on and so forth. So that also adds to the cost of doing business in Nigeria, as well as adds to the cost of our products when we export through the maritime channels. And the issue in today in trade is competitiveness. If your products cost higher than other people delivering to the same market, you obviously will not be competitive. And that is why we must do everything we can to reduce the cost of our products if we're exporting, and to reduce the cost of our production if we're importing materials.
Right. Mr. Mogaji, you earlier on, you said that we should focus on productivity and not production. But, when people think of a solution to waste, they think, okay, add value to it, produce in some sense. But what do you mean, productivity as instead of production?
When you check interventions and initiatives in the country, you find, give them fertilizer. We're concerned about the thousands of acres that is produced under any initiative, as against what is the yield. So for maybe 2.5 acres of like corn now, the average farmer still gets about 1 ton, 1.5 tons. That's the average. While you have some seeds currently in the country that can be deployed to get 5 tons and above. Now, so when you check these interventions, they still buy the seeds that will give you 1.5 tons. Because the ones that will give you 5 tons and above is more expensive.
Are they genetically modified?
They're not genetically modified. So they would give them fertilizers that is substandard. So instead of using maybe 10, you have to use 20. But they cannot afford the 20, so they're still back where they were. And that's why getting youths into that value chain, you need productivity, not production. So productivity is managing using smaller resources to get what you would have gotten using the old one. So we need to focus on productivity, and I'm not saying that in the sector across board.
I was speaking to you talk about young people, and it will seem a lot of young people are actually turning their attention to agriculture. So I was speaking to a young fish farmer, apparently, and, he thought the government is saying come into this field. So let me go into, he's a graduate, by the way. And then he was lamenting just 2 days ago, saying that, well, now he can't purchase feeds for the same amount he used to before. So pretty much he got into He invested a lot.
Yes.
His stock, I think he bought about 1,000 fingerlings for a while. Now his stock, because he can't afford to feed them,
Yes.
and he's at a point where he needs to recoup his investment. I don't know what associations are doing about this, but is there really a way out for these young people who are stuck, as it were?
There's a lot of talk, but not practical solutions put down. Now, so I also, as the Minister of Agriculture, proposed that they would ban fish importation. Well, about 70% of the fish feed we still use is imported. It's corn that you use to make the feed, corn soya. We don't produce enough for the poultry sector and humans. And so we now want to ban. You know, so, and that young man has heeded to that call of, let me go in. But the realities is what we don't prepare the youth for, that policies change. And so your business plan also must be flexible to accommodate the business environment, because policies have been changing for years. And for me, it's the only constant thing is that policies change. That is constant.
Well, policies should change for the better, right? It's not for the worse.
Unfortunately, you see, when we are also looking at the risk, you know, the SWOT analysis, policies have been changing for over 30 years in the agri sector. It's changing. So when you are coming in, you should plan that the policy will change, so that when it changes, you are not at the receiving end. That is where the main challenge with the private sector is. It is constant that policies change. So can you come in with the mindset that when policies change, how do I still survive?
So how policies change?
Policies should not change.
I ask that because there are expectations. I would expect that a policy should have a long-term view.
Yes.
That is why it is a policy. It's like a principle. Truth is constant. Facts are constant, you know, and all of that. So should policies change in a way that it will significantly affect investment and affect outputs? Because if we had long-term policies that could sustain our food production or productivity, whichever way you want to look at it, we would not be where we are now, to the point that we are begging for the federal government to reopen the borders.
You see, politics affects policies, and it affects agriculture. Politics keeps changing in the country. Everybody is defecting here today, tomorrow, so there's no long-term planning.
But governance is a continuum.
Yeah, but unfortunately in Africa, check African countries, most African countries, it's about the person, not the party. And those things affect the planning. So a governor has planned 8 years. Along the line, politics happen, it moves. It's another agenda that he runs. So the agri sector has been a victim of change of policies. You know, just last week, I read in another paper of another major chemical that we use in maintaining weeds that is likely to be banned. They will not renew the licenses. And guess what? The consideration for that is that it's been banned in 20 countries. Yes, it's been banned in 20 countries, but for how long have they been working on alternatives before they ban it? And yet we just brought that document to the regulatory agencies and say, we need to ban it. And they've actually made a statement public that they will not renew the license. So what happens to the farmers who that is what they can afford? So before, you know, we ban or place restrictions, we don't create alternatives, or we initiate alternatives that we've not validated that it works. So policies changes, and that has been constant. And if you want to survive the Nigerian agribusiness sector, you must work with that. That's the reality.
You know, Mr. Ahmed, you know, the thinking for a lot of people, we're approaching Christmas, by the way, so a lot of people are shopping, and what they're seeing at the market is not really funny. I mean, we know what the inflation is, and it appears as though that might keep rising. You know, but the thinking before this border closure was, okay, if it's harder to maybe take it out, then these products will flood Nigerian market. And, you know, the more you have those products, the lower the prices will go. But clearly that is not happening. So what did we get wrong in that area?
Well, I think, first of all, we realized that over the past year, production and productivity have both declined significantly because of the pandemic issue. Many of our factories, many of our members were basically shut down for most of the year. Secondly, transportation, logistics have been significantly impaired. There are times when you couldn't move products from Lagos to places, say, like Abuja or Kano. So I think this has led to a significant reduction in the volume of products available, especially over this period. Now, added to the impact of the border closure, which has also limited, as I said before, the amount of goods coming in, particularly for manufacturers that are importing some of their raw materials from other countries. This obviously has significantly reduced the volume of products available. And I think also the other gentleman has highlighted the fact that with the increase in, with the further deterioration of the value of the Naira, that also has pushed the cost of production. So in all respects, costs have increased significantly. Productivity has declined. The natural thing to expect is that prices will go up. And I think this is what has happened. So I expect that, again, reopening the borders and allowing those things that ought to come legitimately should also help to bring the prices down. And of course, fortunately, the economic situation in the country is improving with regards to the pandemic, the controls, the COVID controls. And so more and more of our members are now reopening their operations and boosting as much production as they possibly can. So
okay, as we wind down, pardon me, as we
yes.
wind down, you talked about the economic situation, infrastructure, but I'd like to quickly take you up on security. If we could just do that in less than a minute. Security or insecurity, yes. Just how much has that affected your business or your members' business?
I think for most of our members, particularly in the northern part of the country, the security has been totally disruptive. It has virtually forced complete closures in many respects. For our members in the southern part, the security has also affected logistics, and they are not able to deliver their products to the various markets. And to that extent, in both respects, the security has been a major cause of concern for the manufacturing sector. And we can only hope that more effort should be made to reduce the insecurity in the country, to enable the economy to thrive, particularly under the present situation when we are also slipping back into recession, as I'm sure you're aware.
All right, and what for you, Mr. Mogaji, would be the implication of that on food security?
2020 is going to be a bit challenging.
2021,
sorry. Why? Because the recent challenge with the Bono farmers, the slaughtering of those farmers, sends a signal to other farmers to, kind of protect their lives. Most of this agri production, because I farmed extensively in the north, so I'm talking from experience. So many of those farms are far from, where they stay. So you will find wives, children telling their fathers, don't go out. You find mothers telling their sons, don't go, because you are not sure of security. So I would expect that right now, because it has to do with farmers, and we've had challenges this year, and climate change is real for next year, we should be having more security personnel around the areas where you have aggregation of farmers, like 20,000, 25,000, where they operate. Because if anything happens in that climate, tomatoes, vegetables, and co will be affected. So we need more security presence around the farmers. We need government to come out to show people that we're on top of this, because it's about the psyche of the farmers now.
Well, gentlemen, we'll have to appreciate you for sharing your thoughts with us. Mr. Ahmed Mansour, the President, Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, as well as Africanfarmer Mogaji, founder, Agribusiness NG. Thank you so much for your thoughts on the program.
Thank you for having me.